Hello, how y'all doing? So many of us struggle with being productive, organized, or focused. And God knows that we have so much on our plates. And certainly compared to 10 years, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we have just a lot going on in our lives. And a lot of us want to be able to be a little bit more efficient, a little more focused. Forget about the labels that you want to give yourself if you have some sort of ADHD or whatnot. I mean, I know certainly I would love to be a little bit more efficient, a little bit more focused, a little bit more organized. And there's like $1 billion business and trying to sell people on being more productive and more efficient, and TV shows and whatnot, and books, all that sort of stuff. So this is a very relevant episode. I'm talking to someone who's an expert on this efficiency and helping people become more productive, or whether it's yourself, or whether it's a friend, a spouse, or a child, talking about like what is going on, what that experience is like, and what possibly you can do about it. So I hope you enjoy. If you enjoy, and if you get something out of it, please do us a favor. Wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's this video one on YouTube, or whether it's on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatnot, take a second, like it, share it, post a comment. That's really going to help us. And subscribe on YouTube. This is Mental Filter. All right, welcome back, everybody, to Mental Filter, where we get to talk about lots of interesting things with interesting people. As you heard it in the introduction, this, I think, is going to be applicable to probably all of you, whether you admit it or not. It's about getting our ish together, getting ourselves together, whether you want to call it clinically being disorganized or whatever acronym you want to use, or whether or not. All of us, I think, can benefit from figuring that stuff out. And I am confident and happy that we have a co-host for today who can talk to that. So without further ado, Dr. Felt, can you introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure, my pleasure. So my specialty is personal productivity, just getting people to be more efficient at what they do and what they want to do or what they wish they do. And I do this in a multiple variety of settings. I do this as a college professor. I do this as a rabbi. Yeah, I know. And I do this as a psychologist, which is I help people just be their personal best. And it could be anything from something as simple as just like pulling a schedule together to getting a diagnosis of ADHD, whatever it is that they need to help people just lock in on their executive functioning so that we could put the fun back into executive functioning. That's really what I like to do.
Got it. Okay, so you already used a word that some people may be familiar with, some people not. What is like the short version definition of executive functioning?
Executive functioning is our internal planner.
Wow, good. Nice and straight to the point. And does everybody have that?
We all do, with just to varying degrees. Like, for instance, myself, I have ADHD. So my internal planner, it's like, I guess, an old Palm Pilot. So, it's still loading on a lot of stuff. It's not up to date with many things. It's not instantly synced to, let's say, my Google, or like seamlessly updating with whatever accounts that I have. So that's where it gets annoying, is that we all have executive functions, but some of us are more executively dysfunctional than others, or what I call ED, executive dysfunction.
The other ED.
Yes, of course. The other.
the lesser known ED.
Right.
So what's
probably more pervasive and negatively impactful in our life?
Right. So what's your background, your professional background? How did you get into this?
Great question. So right now I teach psychopathology at Columbia University, which is where I go through just the different diagnoses and disorders that people have and how to tell the difference apart. One of the reasons why I love doing that is because a lot of what I do in my professional life as a psychologist is I help people tease apart whether or not they're really struggling with ADHD or anxiety or OCD or bipolar or all of the above. Right. And that's really what I love doing, is helping people figure out like what it is that's holding them back. Why can't they get their their bleep together, really, and what's holding them back from being the person they want to be. And I myself struggled with my own ADHD for years, and I had to figure it out both by being married to an Israeli who took no bleep from anyone, especially from me. And I needed it because I was really working 3 jobs to get through grad school, just to pay for myself to get through school and for my new family. And New York rent was insane. So I was really working way more above and beyond, and I needed to be able to pull myself together. Otherwise, I just wasn't able to juggle all of it. So I kind of like trial by fire, learned how to organize myself in order to survive. And then my systems, I'm very systematic in just the way I think. So I've developed them into systems. And then when I was working with people in my first few years of doing therapy, I found that like the regular therapy wasn't really working for a lot of folk. They were like coming into sessions and like we did everything right, but then they would totally forget what happened the next day. And I could very much relate to it because I know that in my own therapy with, let's say, my own therapist, I have no idea what just happened. Like I know it felt good and I totally like for sure was like ranting about something that was completely irrelevant and was noticing the time going by. Oh, that's another $10. Oh, that's another $10. And I found that it was important for me to utilize my own system, A, for my own therapy, but B, for other people as well. And so what I started doing was adapting my own systems through a clinical lens, meaning utilizing existing literature and scientific research on how our brain works, the neuroscience of being organized, the neuroscience of pulling our bleep together really kind of informed the way that my systems then kind of turned into its own program, which is now called Felt's Experiential Rehabilitation, or EFFER for short. And
I love it.
and it's a combination of EF, right, with the F, the executive functioning part, and then the experiential rehabilitation. The underlying idea behind experiential rehabilitation is exactly what it sounds like: to experience success, to know what it's like to actually have your stuff together and to do things in incremental parts where we could kind of build back better. To sorry for all of you guys out there who hate that, but it's really just learning how to behave your life back better, one step at a time, so that you're more on top of your game, one step at a time. And I found that this crosses many different pathologies. It's not just for ADHD, it's not just for anxiety, it's not just for people with TBIs. Like that's a traumatic brain injury, where if, let's say, your actual brain got damaged, so then that part housing the executive functions also would, naturally deteriorate. So
Right.
it's been helpful across many different spectrums for normal people, neurotypical people, neurodivergent folk. It's really been this kind of cool system that's been very helpful.
That's awesome. And I'm glad you just said that, because there's a lot there that I would love to, we'll get into the weeds a little bit. Back in the beginning, you said for, helping people figure out what is and what isn't, and not necessarily pathologizing everything. Like you said, like neurotypical people, neurodiverse people, it's, I don't specialize in ADHD, but anyone who comes here is like, it's not my job to like create a problem for someone, whether they meet, criteria to have a label from the DSM or not. It's about, do you want a different quality of life? So whether a person listening right now or watching right now, if your level of disorganization or attention or whatever it is, like hits a certain level, it's practically everyone who I work with, and probably you too, sort of feels like there's some global reality show idol competition of who has the biggest pathology. And if mine doesn't surpass someone else's, then it's not really worth working on, because like someone else has it worse than me. It's like, it's not about that. Do you want something in your life to be different? So I love that, sort of pulling apart like what's going on here and what do you want different, and then coming up with something that's going to help you. And also what I would, and I would love for you to describe for someone who struggled with ADHD or whatever level of inattention. So let's say you come into a therapy session, right? And you said like, well, I don't really know what we talked about. And for lots of things built in our life, whether it's a therapy session, whether it's a meeting, whether it's having to, I don't know, pay the bills, whatever it is, where it's sort of built in, you need to sit down and have attention for a certain amount of time. That's a long time. Are you able to like to sort of describe what's the experience if you're trying to, or a classroom, right? What's the experience like 5 minutes in that's different than, say, the neurotypical person?
What's life like for me? That's a great question. It's like thinking about while you're talking now, just like, hey, the lighting's kind of weird. I hate that I always get that shiny spot on my forehead, right? So like you're literally talking to me, asking me a question, and I'm already wondering about lighting. Just like I'm in a different place. That's one aspect of it, meaning it's hard to like stay focused on what's happening in the moment, which is ironic because ADHD comes with, and I don't think this is unique to ADHD, but we definitely, those of us with ADHD have it a lot more than others, which is that it comes with both this inattention and hyper attention, both at the same time. I could be completely uninterested in something, but at the same time be super interested in something else. Like, for instance, I'm still being drawn to the monkey pictures in your background. Right. Again, it's something dumb, it's something insignificant, but it's interesting to me. Right. So, therefore, my brain will still be drawn to it. So a lot of people will describe this experience to me that like they'll be trying to get their taxes done, but they can't get out of, constantly clicking into YouTube. And all of a sudden for YouTube, they could focus for 2.5 hours straight watching dumb bleep, right, on stupid, stupid, stupid things. And for 2.5 hours straight, it's like, what happened? But I can't do my taxes for 10 minutes. And it's really what it comes down to is what I often refer to as the CNUs of interest, which is what makes us interested in things are when it's competitive. That's the C, right? Competitive or challenging. I really should have drawn this out for anyone who's going to be watching this. But so the C is for challenging or competitive. The N is for new or novel. The difference really is just semantics, but I like using the phrase novel for something that isn't necessarily new, just different. And then the U would be urgency. So if you think back to any marketing class or any advertisement you've ever seen in your life, they probably contain at least one of these active ingredients of manufacturing interest. Buy now, call now, only 7 left. There's this manufacturing urgency, or under new management, right? There's the newness or the novelty that they're trying to throw at you, right? Or the challenging or competitive is like collect all 7. Or I don't know, whatever it is. You'll see in almost every marketing and anything that the way that they try to trap our brain and kind of compete for our attention is by utilizing one of these aspects, one of these active ingredients of interest, which is one of the CNUs, right? Either challenging or competitive, new or novel, right? Or urgent. So oftentimes our brains, again, both neurotypical and neurodiverse, right? Any brain, any human brain is programmed to be interested in one of these 3 things, and something that's either challenging or competitive, new or novel, or urgent. And so really people, again, both neurotypical and neurodiverse will find themselves constantly either really interested only in that which interests them.
And you're saying taxes is not one of them.
It just isn't. It really isn't. It definitely has the challenging aspect, but it's not new or novel. There's like maybe a sense of urgency on like April 14th, right? Or if you file an extension like I always do in October, right? So it's the same thing, right? So those 3 days before, and you're always wondering how the IRS server doesn't shut down with all of us, like, filing the last second, right? But that's the only time taxes get done. And unless you have one of those amazing accountants, like those boring folk, God bless them, who they're on top of it, and they'll text you and email you and harass you to get the documents that they need, right? But otherwise, the rest of us, it's just, it's only going to happen when it has the U, right? The urgency or like the novelty, because you really wanted to get that check from, I forgot what stimulus. I don't know what we're up to now, but like some year, some tax year, they gave us stimulus.
So, and this is very relatable. I am sure if there's any parents listening out there who have kids who've struggled with any degree of this, it's like the common struggle that they have is 1 second. So he or she can't sit for 5 minutes to do their homework. I mean, the homework should take 5 minutes, but they could play Fortnite for 3 hours, or they could, like you said, to go on YouTube, they could do this, they could do that. So to I guess a neurotypical parent's like, so, that means that they could focus. And yet they're not on this. So then they jump to something like really negative. Oh, they're just being lazy. But then again, there are some kids who maybe could, and they are being lazy, or they don't think it's important, so they don't do it. So what's like something small?
I hear this complaint all the time. Parents are always giving me this complaint, which is, I don't understand why my kid can play video games for 3 hours straight, but he can't do literally 5 minutes of homework. It's 5 minutes of homework. Yeah, and this is the answer. The CNUs. It's just homework just can't compete. It really can't. It's not on the same level. Now, So like the solutions for that would be, again, takes a little bit of creativity, right? And maybe some bribing, right? A little bit of bribing, right? Call it what you want, right? I call it incentivizing or contingencies. For those of us who don't bribe kids as a matter of principle, that's fine, even though we're ourselves live by bribes. I'm saying, right? A paycheck, is that not the greatest bribe in the world to get you to show up at 9 a.m. at a job and stick it out for the greatest hours of the day till 5? Like, come on, they're bribing you. But that is really what's going on, is that homework doesn't have the CNUs. And so if we could somehow develop the CNUs, like, hey, let's set a timer. If we could get this homework done in 4 minutes, how crazy would that be if we could beat it and get it done in 4 minutes, right? So you have this big fat timer, bam, you just created urgency. Something as simple as that, right? Or like you can't watch TV till you finish the homework. Damn, we just created something challenging and competitive. Or right now there's a novelty at the end. They get to like get some reward. This is what I would call a contingency. It's the same idea. It's trying to take these CNUs and use them for our advantage.
Got it. Okay. Now, do you see more adults, children, both?
Anyone and anything that struggles with trying to pull their stuff together, that's what I do. So I see people with borderline, I see people with bipolar, I see people with ADHD, I see people with anxiety. I see regular folk who just want to pull their life together, and I see a lot of ADHD.
Got it. Now, this is sort of like a broad question. Is it, as a society, probably, and more Western society, probably, the way we've been sort of conditioned, is it even fair expectations for most people? So it's, the society's built up. Like, you should be able to do X. You should be able to sit through class and then go on to high school and then college, and you should be able to sit at a desk if that's your job and focus and get all these jobs done and come home and focus on your kids' homework and whatever stuff you have to do at home and pay your taxes. And there's just a lot of things built in that require organization and attention and focus and all those things. Like, are we our own worst enemy?
That's such a good point. I wonder that also sometimes. Like people ask me, so how do you get a PhD and rabbinical ordination? 2 of them actually, and run 3 different businesses? And the answer is a lot of Ritalin. But then I look around and I see that there are other people who have done similar achievements as me who haven't done it with Ritalin. And upon further like investigation, I've noticed that you'll see in most of these cases that they've somehow figured out a way to tap into their own internal CNUs. Either it's something that's a passion for them. They love this, area of work that they've gotten into, or they're super into their family, or they're super into, then they're able to do that. But barring that, meaning barring drugs or super passion, then yeah, it could be very difficult for both neurotypical and neurodiverse folk to kind of be expected to always be on top of their game. That's a lot. It's really a lot.
So building off of that, then, do you think every kid should go through traditional school? Not to
It's
put
a
you on the
whole
spot or
topic.
anything.
Yeah, no, that's a whole different topic. And there's that famous line from Einstein that, everyone's genius is different. And if we judge the fish by its ability to fly, then it would be an idiot. So it's a similar concept that, like, listen, I clearly wasn't built to sit in a classroom, and yet here I am. I'm a professor. Like, I'm literally in the classroom teaching other people. Again, is my class very different? Like, I design it very differently? Yeah, right. So we have I have a brief lecture, like a mini lecture in the beginning, just orienting people to what's going on. We have a mini quiz. Everything's like mini. It's like broken down to small things. I model for them, what it's like to interview or to have a session with this specific pathology. Then we do question answers on my own like mock session. Then they do their own mock session, right, with each other, and then they go through their questions and answers. You see how I try to make it as interactive and engaging as possible, because it sometimes could be too hard to expect people to manufacture engagement and motivation constantly on and that's why so many of us need that Netflix time at home, just to like get home and veg out, because there's a lot that's expected of our brains and it's very taxing. The day could be very, very taxing for all of us.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a pretty cliche question, I guess, here. Is that, has this changed over time? So I'm not saying that technology is the devil and that's the cause of everything. Reality is, though, our reality is different than it was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. What's a fair statement to say is, like, has it changed? Has that made an impact? Can it be reversed? Like,
To some degree, again, neuroplasticity goes both ways, right? Meaning it allows us to be more adaptive and resilient in both directions, right? So it'll make us become someone who is more dependent on technology, right? But could also allow us to find oasis, right? Some sort of space for a digital detox where we could connect to others. So again, it's really up to us. It's our choice. And it's in our ability to choose whether or not how we interact with technology. I have this great line that I use in some of my more rabbinical work, which is it's incumbent upon all of us to be a discerning consumer of media. And I would say the same thing when it comes to technology. It's our responsibility to be a discerning consumer of technology.
so does that mean you think it does, like, if I engage in technology or social media, that is it fair to say that that has an impact on my ability to have sustained focus and attention?
Oh, of course. Yeah. One of my students did her research on this, on how much does video games and social media and that impact on children with ADHD. And she showed significant negative effects of technology. But again, right, that's a lot and unrestricted. Also, her study did cover over the course of COVID. So like, again, I think COVID is a big outlier in the sense that like it was survival, and many of us really leaned on technology pretty heavily. But at its core, like you could use in both ways. So technology on the one hand would make you, let's say, have a reduced attention span, right? So let's say you start out neurotypical and now you're not. So like that could kind of do that to you within your own like neuroplasticity again, where it would be in a negative way. But you could use it also in positive ways. For instance, like shutting off YouTube during your productive times. I have that on my computer. I have everything blocked off during my productive times. And I even shut off my entire internet at 11 o'clock at night. That's it. All of it. All of my internet is over at 11 o'clock. I just found that I was always ordering dumb junk from Amazon and all those purchases were after 11 o'clock. Nothing good could really happen after that. So
Nothing good
like
happens after 11 o'clock.
well, yeah, and if it isn't, then get pictures. But the point is that it's really about using it. So if I'm a discerning consumer of that technology, then yeah, I could use that to help me. So now I know I got to get all my work in before 11. But now I'm done, right? 11 o'clock gets over. I shut off my technology world, and now I'm able to focus on my wife, on my kid, whatever it is that needs to be attended to. All right. I even block it. I have my internet blocked between, I call it Bed Bath and Beyond time, which is between 5 and 7:15, because that's when I do Bed Bath and Beyond.
You're
That's
not
when
going
I
to be able
take.
to use that much longer because they went out of business.
I know. It'll be a relic, cultural relic. But that's like the time that I dedicate to my family, right? So my phone's on do not disturb, and it's the same idea of like I'm trying to be as discerning as I can about my use of technology, my relationship with technology.
So now, on the flip side of what you just said, I am sure that you've had parents, come in and say, and like, point at technology, like that is the cause of everything. If there wasn't technology, if they wouldn't be on that stupid Fortnite, blah, 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 then they would be completely fine. They'd be able to focus on everything, which someone who has ADHD, that's not true.
It's not
Fair?
always necessarily true. I don't think technology is necessarily the most beneficial thing in the world. I don't think it's helping your kid, but
Right,
it
right.
definitely isn't the source of all evil. It's not what's causing their problems. It's the management of that technology that could most likely be a much more productive place to look at.
Got it. Okay. So now, without getting like too sciency, because I don't want to get too much into that on the podcast, you mentioned Ritalin before. Okay. I mean, we're not going to go through all the medications and whatnot. That's not the time and place. What is it doing for a person?
Great question. So there are two types. I'm just going to talk about the Ritalin aspect of it. So there's stimulants and non-stimulants. Ritalin happens to be a stimulant. The way the stimulant works is by first taking a step back and just looking at what's going on in let's say that neurodiverse brain. So for let's say in my brain, right, an ADHD brain, it means that the dopamine receptors in my brain, the thing that gives me that chemical that makes me feel good, that dopa hit, right, has a much higher threshold. So that means I need more stimulation to make me get my happy place. And so therefore during class when the teacher's talking about like George Washington crossing some river or something like that, unless she has a video, a full contact gory like the gory glory of that combat scene, not interested, right? Like again, if you're just yakking on and on, it's not stimulating enough for me. So what the stimulant does is that it raises my level of stimulation so that I'm already in a higher level. So everything is going a little bit faster for me in my brain. My heart rate is going much faster. it increases my threshold so that now I need less to stimulate me. And now George Washington crossing the river is actually kind of interesting. So I want to know what happened. Why didn't he get shot at by the British? Like, how do they get all these people across a frozen river with wooden oars? That's kind of weird, right? How do you get through ice with wood?
Got it. So that's what the stimulant does.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Now, also, again, without getting too much into the weeds, there's a lot of, like, at least for the layperson, gray areas. Like, is it ADHD? Is it not? Is it like they're just not really motivated in school or not? Or do I just not really like my job and whatever it is? How valuable is getting some sort of expansive testing, like neuropsychological testing or things like that?
Great question. So now
Even though
there are
I know you're in the field, right? You're a psychologist, and I don't know how much testing you actually do, but on the consumer side, which a lot of people listening are consumers, it's like sometimes they'll be recommended, oh, get some testing, and sometimes they can get it through their district, and sometimes not, and it can be very costly. Like,
listen,
how beneficial is it?
if it's free, go for it, right? Again, nothing's free, so you have to pay for it in terms of time. So it's still worthwhile to listen to the way I break this down, but really there are two kinds of testing, right? There's the full-on neuropsych, which is usually a multi-hour battery, which can cost between $3,000 to $7,000. Again, in New York, it's more the higher end. That's, I guess, what would be considered the most comprehensive. But a caveat is that let's just be real, right? Let's think about it for 2 seconds. Does that setting really mimic real life? Putting your kid in a room, one-on-one attention with a bunch of tests and interesting stimulating things for the child to do with a psychologist that's dedicated just to them, does that really mimic real life? Come on, right? So like, I think that it's worthwhile to just take into context that, like, again, there's no way to like really do this in the most perfect way unless you have someone follow your child throughout the day. But what it definitely could help, because part of the comprehensive, or at least they should be doing this when they're giving you a full neuropsych, is they should be reaching out to teachers. They should be trying to get like scales from teachers and like insight and input from those teachers, which is helpful. Again, it does help, but sometimes it's really just this, it's a little excessive. I don't know if that's what everyone needs. Again, then the other end is just the 2-hour eval that you have with a clinician, like someone like myself who is trained and very experienced with ADHD, not your local physician. They may not be as proficient in this, but someone who's kind of trained for it and can sniff it out and knows what to ask and what to look for. That could be a little bit more helpful and a little bit more economical, because it'll cost you a lot less. And it's recognizing that, hey, listen, I'm not in the classroom with your kid, right? I could ask your teachers, I could send the same format of questioning to your teachers to find out. But at the end of the day, it'll cost you significantly less. So again, I really think that it's up to the parent to think, hey, listen, how much do I want to invest in this? Do I want to do this as comprehensively as I can, or do I just need enough of an insight? Because again, like I said before, it's not exactly mimicking real life. So
Right. And people can come back with this, 25 pages of an evaluation, read through it, and they'll be like, okay, now what? Like, yeah, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We're not really sure. Yeah, this, that. And then like, okay, great. And then now what? And then again, on the flip side, you can have someone who goes to, let's say, a psychiatrist and see him for 15 minutes and be like, yeah, for sure. ADHD, here's some
I don't
medication.
know, 15 minutes to do an eval. That doesn't sound like due diligence. There should be
Oh,
some
that's what
sort
I'm
of
saying. That's exactly what I'm saying.
yeah.
That there, I've had people who unfortunately have been to people, and it's 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then boom, they're ready, just like, or they go to their primary care and they're just, it's fine. Yeah, you're always having trouble paying attention. Okay, sure, here. I mean, that's, to me, that's
How do
like,
they know it's not anxiety? A lot of times anxiety will mimic a lot of ADHD symptoms, the
agreed.
inability to concentrate, lack of being able to sleep, and just like little stupid things like that. But not being able to sleep will then make you more restless and aggressive and irritable. These are all things that would come up on some sort of ADHD testing. And how do you know it's not really anxiety? And
I'm
again,
with you. I think it's unethical.
yes, I very much would agree with that. And I think that sometimes you have to realize that there's what I often refer to as ADHD induced anxiety. When a person doesn't have a properly developed executive functioning, so their internal planner, it's not exactly up to par, it makes sense that they would have a lot of anxiety about their life, right? They never know what time anything is. I think when we were working out the timing for this, you saw me in my state of like trying to figure out the times of, I'm in a different country and I'm trying to figure out the timing with you. And it makes sense that I would be anxious about it, because I don't have an adequate internal timer or an internal planner. So like again, a lot of times it really does take some due diligence to tease out what is really going on.
Right. Okay, so that's really helpful, I think, for the people listening about, evaluations. Have you observed the difference between men and women, boys and girls?
There are differences. I personally haven't observed them only because I feel like I don't have enough exposure to like seeing them directly one after the other. But I know that the research is replete with differences. For instance, just societally, we have boys kind of are given a little bit more of a wide berth when it comes to being more hyperactive, and girls oftentimes will even like stupid things like calling out or speaking up, speaking out of hand, right? So with a girl, there's a lot more social consequence to something like that than it is for a boy. So there are a lot of unique differences, and the research does show that it's unfortunately an under-researched area in the sense that we don't really have enough understanding of those differences, but we know there are differences. There's a lot of underdiagnosing with girls who have ADD, meaning like let's say ADHD inattentive type, and an overdiagnosis on the girls who are, let's say, more out there and therefore have the ADHD that is more hyperactive. So there's a lot of gender differences and societal differences that I think would lead to some sort of mismatch between those.
Agreed. And I think stereotypically, I would imagine that boys or men sort of society has given a little more of a leash on certain behaviors than, again, stereotypically, than for girls, whether it's like, jumping around and horsing around when they're younger, or even in fact when they're older. There's maybe an implicit allowance in society, which then allows for a man or a boy who has ADHD, where they won't like jump so quickly to assuming that, as opposed to a girl.
Yeah, it's very true and sometimes unfair, honestly.
Yeah, agreed. Have you seen, again, the oldest question in the book in our field is nature versus nurture, and which we'll never get a real clear answer to.
I thought isn't the consensus at this point is what nurture does with nature?
Okay, so it's not one or the other. That's
Right. It's
right.
both.
Yeah, it's both. I agree. So now, theoretically, could you have someone who, you sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier, someone who grows up like neurotypical, is fine, school, does great, focuses, and then as an adult develops this
Oh, yes.
disorganization. It's I can't focus. I have my laundry's piling up, my bills are piling up. Just can't get this things together. And they're like, "What happened? What
Yeah.
freaking happened?"
Yeah. I think Adam Sandler has a routine called What the Hell Happened to Me? And it very much encapsulates a lot of the experience for many, many people. So there are two things. There's adult onset ADHD, which is people who get it when they're an adult, which the way I understand it is really more like the second thing. So I think it's all really one thing, which is that you have to realize that the responsibilities we have as adults is so much more complex than as kids. As kids, we're really going through so much of a more structured lifestyle, right? We have school, you have to be here for class at this time, you have to do this work, there's the syllabus, this is the work that's done, your mom's gonna annoy you till you do your homework, right? It's just kind of like things are a lot more structured. You're given a lot more of just stability in your everyday expectations. You know what's expected of you, you know what you need to do, there's consequences if you don't. Things are kind of set up for us, right? But then when you get older and you start this whole adulting thing, and this is why it becomes so difficult for so many people, is that then there's so much leeway, and like sometimes that freedom to just be you is a little too free. And it's a tough one, really, because these expectations are tough. Yeah, like there is like, oh, well, you got to be at work at 9 to 5. Yeah, but then what am I doing in front of that computer? Like from 9 to 5, right? Like, how am I getting my stuff done? When am I getting this project done? It's due by the end of the month, right? Or I need this quarterly done by the end of the quarter, right? So we feel like we have all this time. And I find that this happens a lot to college kids as well. Like they're moving from that very structured high school experience to college, where like all of a sudden things are a lot more free and a lot more like laissez-faire, and then it becomes much more difficult for them. And it's so ironic to think that when we give people more liberty and more freedom, sometimes it actually makes it more difficult for them to be free, to be who they want to be.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, some people would love to be able to go through life with people telling them exactly what to do and what to
Yes,
do.
yes, yes.
But then again, there's two sides to every coin. But then also, then it's hard for them to develop their own independent living skills. They're doing that, and then we're accommodating that too much, and then that becomes not helpful. I mean, which speaks to another thing that I wanted to add, which speaks to is like, who said we have to be one way? We talk about society expectations. Like, who said that, like, I have to be this amount of organized, or I have to, like, do this type of job, or be this type of productive, or learn this? Like, who said? In fact, and I'm curious what your experience has been. In fact, I have friends and family and lots of other people who I've met where, like, sometimes I'm a bit envious of their ADHD. And I'm more on like the linear side, and multitasking is difficult for me. I have friends and people like, wow, it's like a superpower. You could do 80 things at once, or people who, maybe run a business and they're able to, like, I don't know if they're compartmentalizing, or maybe they're just like forgot about it already. And like, they can take a phone call and then boom, next. And then boom, 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 boom. And they're moving around this things. And I'm like, holy moly, I would be so overwhelmed by what they're doing and moving. And
They
sometimes, and
usually
one more thing, and sometimes being someone who's more to the other end, I know it's not true, but sometimes it can feel like it's hard to, like, have a sustained relationship with them, not because sometimes it feels like they're being rude, but they're not being rude. They're really, really not. I mean, sometimes people are being rude, but they're not necessarily being rude. But like the fact that they don't, like, can't stay on the phone for more than 30 seconds with you, or they're like jumping and you're trying to stay, focused on a topic, is not like them necessarily being rude. So in some ways, it can make them way more successful. Is that what do you say?
I have mixed feelings on this. I often
Okay.
like quoting Howie Mandel, who says, like, talks about his ADHD and his OCD, and he's like, for all those people who tell me it's a gift, where do I return it? And I get that. Sometimes I feel that. And sometimes I feel that myself. It does make life a lot more difficult. And a few times during your question, which was very long for my attention span, so I
I've
apologize
been
for
I've
interrupting.
been accused of that many times before, so don't worry.
Many times during your question, I was just smiling cynically to myself when you're saying how they're multitasking. They're not. Multitasking is actually one of the least effective things people with ADHD do. It means that they're just doing a 20% job and then 80%. So they're really just messing up many more things than accomplishing. They would be much better off just doing one thing at a time, and using that hyper focus to get that thing done really well. That's number one. Number two, like the being rude, it's a real problem. I'm dealing right now, just this morning, right? I'm dealing with a couple where she said, I just can't stand the fact that you never say bye. I was like, all right, and then you hang up. Like, again, they've been married for 20 years. Like, you would think, just get over it, right? Like, look, he's so successful. First of all, he's not that successful. Second of all, like, it's just really annoying. Some of these things are rude. And yeah, it's just, we are living in a world where there's a cultural contract of what's considered appropriate and what's not. And if you're not doing that, call it what you want. Oh, I have whatever many letters after my name or before my name or whatever they are, right? It still rubs people the wrong way. And so I don't know if necessarily it's a superpower for them to be like super rude. And the last part of like them looking like they're like, I would be so overwhelmed, they usually are overwhelmed. That's usually what their experience is. And you'll find people who are successful in this and they're accomplishing. That's true. That's true. In certain areas, they are successful, but at what cost?
That's fair. I'm glad I asked the question then. I remember seeing a long time ago, and my memory is foggy on this, talking about successful people or even not successful people. I remember reading something that different, like, professions, different industries attract, different people with different tendencies. Like, if I remember correctly, it's something along the lines that if people with ADHD were drawn more to, like, the performing arts, or I think even the armed forces,
Yes.
things like that. Can you speak a little to that?
Yeah, there are two different inventories, the strong inventory and Holland. There are two different inventories that people use to look at what they're kind of inclined to do. And yeah, there has been some overlap. It makes sense if you think about it. You should know, ironically, another profession that people with ADHD are drawn to is being a teacher. And the reason is because you have to make a million decisions in that moment. You have like however many students in your class. I remember once having like 70 students in my class, and like I have to be keeping on top of every single one and kind of registering every single movement, every single thought, every single piece of information that's coming from them and that's coming back from me, responding and being there. So like even that would make a lot of sense. And they say salesman, right? Because there's a certain like rush they get like right before the big sale, and it's just similar to what's going on in the performing arts. They get that like adrenaline rush, and they almost like live for that, because then that gives them flow, right? That famous concept from positive psychology, right? Where people with ADHD can tap into the flow. It's when they're feeling like they're maximizing themselves. And that for them is a real drug, because that's when all of our dopamine's going crazy. Because when we're in this extremely stimulating environment, right? Remember the way I was describing the neuroscience earlier, right? It really like it makes us lit, right? We're alive, right? Our brain is flooded with dopamine. We're on a different plane. And I actually just said this to someone recently, is that those of us with ADHD, we feel life a lot more richly than others. So that means our highs are higher, but our lows are also lower, which brings it down to this idea of like recognizing that, yeah, sometimes it's hard to tease apart between the depression, the anxiety, the ADHD, what's coming from what. And a lot of times I recommend that if you're feeling down, if you're feeling like extra, like that kind of stuff, look into it. Like, where is this coming from? What's it really coming from? But just to get back to the point of the question, yeah, there are different professions that will attract a person who needs to be more stimulated. And the visionaries, the actions, the thrill seeking, like that kind of stuff. And it makes a lot of sense if you look at it neurologically.
Right.
These are people who need enhanced stimulation.
So to build off of that, and I know we're going to be up against the clock soon, and we're not going to get to everything that we hope to. I think for everybody, neurotypical and otherwise, probably have a harder time being bored. It's like people are so terrified of being bored than, let's say, I don't know, 10 years ago. Is it fair then to say, also based on what you just said, that someone with ADHD maybe has an even harder time being bored?
Yes. First of all, they'd be bored more often.
Right.
And there's less things that could provide that stimulation for them than for other people. Like if it's a book, it'd have to be a really good book, right? If it's a movie, even a movie, I have people who watch just like the first 15 minutes of movie and then they're on to the next one, right? So like, yeah, it could make it much more likely to be bored.
It's almost painful for some people to be bored. Like, I can't be bored.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is totally like what I call a doorknob, right? Which is right at the end of a session as someone drops like a really huge like clinger. But like, honestly, I call this the avoidance trap, which is oftentimes they're running away from something. Or the fact that they can't stand something means that there's something inside pushing them. That motor that keeps them running, it's being driven by something. What is that thing? And I often find it to be very valuable to look inside and figure that out.
So this was very helpful, and maybe we'll do it again sometime to add in some of the gaps that we didn't get to. If people want to know more about like what system, there's a lot out there. So it's hard to know like what systems are helpful, what someone just selling something. So how could people find out more, whether it's about your system or just more about how they contact you, or just more about ADHD and like, what's the best?
In general, I'd rather give advice for in general, because again, I don't need, like, I'm not here to push myself. Anyone wants me, they could Google my website, adhdoctor.org. But in general, look for licensing. There's a lot of fakers out there. There's a lot of people who, oh, I have ADHD, so now I could, tell people what to do. And that's great. They probably have a lot of helpful stuff, and there's a lot of good stuff out there. Just if you're entrusting your life or your child with someone, it's super important to look for some sort of accreditation or licensing. I'm not saying that just because they're licensed, they're good. Again, we have some people out there who are licensed and aren't good, right? And there are some just coaches or folks out there without licensing who are incredibly talented and very helpful. I just think that it's super important to look for some sort of accreditation, and if not, social cred. Hear what other people say about them. Ask around.
Is there like a general, like a website that is a recognized?
Well, yeah, Chad is excellent. Chad is great. Attitude Mag is also a phenomenal resource that I highly recommend. These are all really, really great places to start, and they'll have a lot of resources. They'll have a lot of like verified experts who are really good at this stuff and have been around for a really long time.
Okay, fantastic. This is fantastic. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Pleasure. I love talking about how to make people better.